Hi! In this video, we'll be talking about multi-file websites. So at this point, we've gotten really good at making single-page websites. So our website can have a single page with all of our information in one place. But we noticed that a lot of times websites online have multiple pages. They'll have a home page, they'll have menu, nutrition, they'll have all these different pages all within the same site. And we see that every time we go to a new page, the URL actually changes. It goes from chipotle.com to /menu to /nutrition. So we see that it's nice for a lot of reasons to split up our site into several different pages, each of them with their own information, their own images. It's a whole new page. And so what's nice about this is we get to separate out the content for the user. We're avoiding information overload, having all of our information on one massive page. We get to split it up a little bit and separate out the content for the user. And we get to separate out the coding logic for the developer. So rather than writing one massive HTML file with all the code for the entire website, we get to split that code across several different HTML and CSS files, thereby keeping each individual file pretty manageable and simple. So making multi-page websites is a very useful practice, both for the developer and for the user who actually ends up using the website. So in this lesson, we'll cover writing separate HTML files and linking them together so that your site has multiple pages, and writing a separate CSS file and applying that separate CSS file to an HTML file so that we're separating out the logic for the structure of the page and the style of the page. So the first thing we need to know is how to add a new file to your site. So to do this, all we need to do is press the Create New File button at the bottom of the file directory. Now it's very important that this new file that you add either ends with .html or .css. We want the file to be an HTML file or a CSS file. Now one thing to note here is that this index.html file is very special. The default landing page for websites is usually called index.html. So whenever you're making a website, this is the file that is first rendered when you click run. When you press run, that is the page that opens up is your index.html file. And then you can link to the other files. So how do we link HTML files together? Well, let's say we had a website with two files, index.html and about.html. How do we make it so that the user can navigate from index to about and back? Well, all we have to do is put a link on our page, and the href, the reference for that link, should simply be the name of the file. So if I put a link to about.html from my index page, that will link to the about.html file. And if I put a link to index.html in my about.html file, that will link back to the index page. So that's how we can link two HTML files together. Now, what about adding an external CSS file? If I have my HTML file, index.html, and I've written all of my CSS code in a separate file, call it style.css, how do I make it so that all of that CSS code ends up applying to the HTML page? Well, all we have to do is add this tag to the head of our web page. We put a link in the head, and rather than writing out all of those style rules inside the head, we simply put a single link, and that links to where the CSS rules actually live. And so this line in the head of your web page applies the given CSS file to the HTML file that it's in. So we say link, rel equals style sheet, type equals text/CSS, and href equals the name of the file. So the name of the file that you're making goes here. Whether it's style.css or homepage.css or my really awesome special CSS.css, that's where the name of the file goes. Now doing this is useful for several reasons. We want to start moving away from typing all of our CSS code on our HTML page and actually separating that out into its own file. And it's good because one, we get to separate out the code for the structure, which is HTML, and the style, which is CSS. We get to put those in two separate places. And it's really cool is we get to write the CSS code once, and we can easily apply it to several different HTML files. Rather than copying and pasting all those rules into the head of every single web page, we just write it once, store it in a separate file, call it style.css, and then we can apply it to several different HTML files without having to retype it. So that is how we can split websites across several different files. Let's dive into the editor and see some examples of this. All right, so here I am in the editor, and I have a simple web page that has a header saying welcome to the home page, and some text saying click here to go to the about page. Now what I want to do is turn this single page site into a multi-page site. I want to have multiple pages that the user can navigate between, and I want to write my CSS code elsewhere, not on the HTML file. I want to have a separate CSS file. So first, let's add a second page that the user can navigate to. So to do that, I'm going to go over here and create a new file. We'll call this the about page. It'll be about.html. It's important that it ends with .html. So we'll add this file, and there we go. So I'm going to start with it being exactly the same as the home page, but what I'm going to add, I'm going to change the title to About. I'm going to call this the About page. I'm going to say click here to go to the home page. Now if we run this, we're stuck on the home page. We can't actually get to the About page. So let's go back to our home page, index.html, and I'm going to add a link to the About page. So it's going to be an A tag whose href is about.html. And I want to say click here. So if we do this, here is now a link, and if I click on it, there we go, it renders the About page. Now there's actually no way to get back, so in order to get back, let's go over to the About page and make a new link back whose href is back to index.html. I want to click here to go to the home page. There we go. So here's the home page. We'll go to the About page. We're on the About page, and we can go back to the home page. All right, now let's write some CSS code that's going to apply to both of these pages. Now, rather than writing all of our code up here in the head, we want to separate that out and keep it in its own separate file so we don't have to copy it into both of these files. We'll just write it once. We're going to write it in a file called style.css. Now in here, let's say that the body of every page is going to have the font family of Helvetica, and the text align is going to be centered. So we've written our code, but we now need to add it. We need to link it into each of these files. So to do this, we're going to say link rel equals style sheet, type equals text/CSS, and the href equals style.css. Now if you forget all the attributes that you need to set, you can check it out in the docs tab. But the main important part to remember is the href needs to be the same name as the file. So if we run this, there we go. The style is now applied. Now what's cool is I can take this and apply the exact same CSS code to a different page without ever having to retype out those CSS rules. So now it should be applying to both of those pages. So that is how we can make a multi-page website where the user can click between different pages, and we can write separate CSS code that applies to multiple pages on the site. Now it's your turn to dive in and give it a try.